Tony, a 46-year-old man living in Sacramento, California. He had the kind of life most people would call stable: a modest home, two well-behaved kids, and a wife he believed he knew better than anyone else. They had been together for 16 years, long enough for everything to feel familiar, long enough for him to believe that love didn't need to be tested every day. His wife was a regional manager who often traveled for work, and Tony had never felt insecure about it. He trusted her completely. The truth is, in marriage, when you live too long inside the comfort zone, you forget that sometimes peace is just the quiet before the storm. That morning, she told Tony she had to go to San Diego for 10 days, a mandatory company conference. "A big opportunity for my career," she said. He smiled, kissed her goodbye at 5 a.m., and watched her step into the Uber headed for the airport. Through the window, he saw the car's taillights fade into the dark, then went back to bed, never realizing he had just sent his wife off to a completely different place. Not San Diego, but Lake Tahoe, where she would spend the next 10 days with her ex-lover. Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with a fight. It comes quietly, on an ordinary morning like that one, when everything seems too peaceful, when "I love you" still sounds sincere. And that, more than anything, was what broke Tony later. Not the affair itself, but the fact that in the moment she left, he still trusted her, still loved her, still said, "I'll miss you," to someone who was already gone. Tony's story began with a goodbye, like so many before it, but ended with a truth no one is ever ready to face. Sometimes the person you love the most is the one who's been slowly leaving you all along. She called it a great opportunity. A 10-day leadership conference in San Diego. All the regional managers had to attend. There would be training sessions, partner meetings, strategic workshops. Her voice was full of excitement, like someone on the verge of a major career breakthrough. Tony watched her neatly fold her business dresses into the suitcase, smiling at how confident she looked. So different from the young woman he'd met years ago. He didn't know that when people start building a lie, they perform it with incredible grace, and that the listener's trust becomes the perfect prop. That morning, when the Uber pulled up, the sky was still dark. Tony stood by the window, watching the car disappear down their quiet street. He didn't realize it was the last time he would ever see her as an honest wife. She vanished, not just from their home, but from his heart, the moment those wheels began to turn. All day, Tony went about his routine. He received a text. "Just got here." "The hotel is beautiful. The first session starts tomorrow." He replied, "That's great. Do your best. The kids and I love you." Simple, sincere, and completely misplaced. Because when he sent that message, she wasn't in San Diego. She was at a lakeside hotel in Tahoe, just a few hours from their home, where her ex was waiting. They say betrayal doesn't begin with a kiss. It begins with the first lie. And in Tony's case, that lie was spoken softly, with loving eyes, and a gentle good morning kiss. A beginning that seemed harmless, but would mark the start of the greatest collapse of his life. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Tony sat down at his usual spot to pay a few bills, a quiet end-of-month ritual he'd done for years. The soft blue glow of the laptop screen lit up his face, calm and unbothered as always. Until, just a few seconds later, his world began to crack. Amid the usual list of expenses, groceries, gas, the kids' tuition, one entry stood out: Hyatt Regency Lake Tahoe. He froze. Lake Tahoe? That couldn't be right. She was supposed to be in San Diego. Tony clicked on the transaction details. 10 nights, booked that same morning, right before her supposed flight. His heart pounded. A cold wave crept up his spine. He opened her travel emails, double-checked dates and times, hoping there was some mistake, any explanation. But there wasn't. No system error, no coincidence. Just one undeniable truth. The woman he trusted completely was somewhere else entirely. He called the hotel, voice trembling slightly. "I just need to know if my wife is staying there. Her name is..." The receptionist, polite and professional, interrupted him gently. "I'm sorry, sir. We're not allowed to disclose guest information." That single sentence told him everything he needed to know. Tony hung up and sat in silence. The house was as quiet as ever, only the clock ticking softly in the background. But everything inside him had changed. The trust he had spent 16 years building collapsed with one click. He looked around the room, at the framed family photos, the smiling faces frozen in time. And for the first time, they looked like relics of another life. A life he thought was real. And then Tony realized he had 10 days. 10 days to pretend he didn't know. 10 days to stare into the truth he wasn't ready to face. 10 days to prepare to leave the woman he once believed he'd grow old with. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't need a knife in the back. Just one line on a bank statement is enough to kill an entire lifetime of trust. Tony didn't smash things. He didn't scream. He didn't call her to ask why. He just sat there, silent. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of a man watching a storm form on the horizon, knowing it's about to destroy everything he thought was real. And when the emotions finally settled, logic took over. He needed to know the whole truth. That night, Tony opened his laptop again, logged into his bank account, and began scrolling through old transactions. The farther he went, the colder his chest felt. Each bill, each line of payment was like a tiny blade cutting into him. A hotel in Reno, a lakeside restaurant in Tahoe, a wine shop in Truckee. Every charge matched perfectly with one of her business trips or visits to old friends. And every time, Tony had stayed home, cooking dinner, putting the kids to bed, and texting her, "Sleep well, honey." He kept digging. He opened the phone records and searched the unfamiliar number she often called. It appeared hundreds of times, early mornings, lunch breaks, even after midnight. When he finally looked it up, his heart clenched. It was the number of her ex, the man she once said she had completely forgotten. He remembered a few months back when she got a friend request on social media. She'd quickly closed her laptop the moment he glanced over. He'd laughed it off at the time. But now, as Tony opened her Facebook page and scrolled through her friends list, the name appeared, clear, undeniable, staring back at him from the screen. Then he saw the photo. An ordinary picture, taken at a small restaurant in Reno. The man was smiling, raising his beer toward the camera. And behind him, faintly, almost hidden, was her, Tony's wife. Not holding hands, not touching, just a blurred figure in the background. But it was enough. Enough to make every lie collapse in an instant. That was the moment Tony understood. Betrayal doesn't need noise. It happens quietly, through long messages, through trips wrapped in gentle lies. And in that quiet darkness, a man learns to face pain, not with rage, but with clarity. Tony chose not to confront her, not because he was afraid, but because he finally understood. When someone has lied to you for long enough, every word they speak becomes just another layer of smoke to hide the truth. And sometimes, silence is the loudest way to make a liar hear their own echo. In the days that followed, Tony began to prepare. Every night, after the kids were asleep, he sat alone in his office, quietly collecting evidence. Bank statements, call logs, screenshots. Each file he saved wasn't just proof for his lawyer. It was a handful of ashes from a trust that once burned bright. He didn't cry. Tears are for those who still have hope, and Tony had none left. The next morning, he met with a lawyer. The man spoke calmly, professionally, but to Tony, every word cut like a scalpel. "You have enough evidence," the lawyer said. "We'll proceed legally." "Stay calm and do everything in silence," Tony nodded. Silence, something he'd mastered after 16 years of marriage, had now become his strongest weapon. During those 10 days, she still video called every night, still talked about her busy conference, still asked about the kids. And Tony still smiled, still answered softly, still played the part of the trusting husband. But inside, he was quietly untangling himself from that marriage. Thread by thread, calmly, and with finality. On the 8th day, Tony wrote a letter. Not long, just a few lines. I know about Tahoe. I know about him. I've moved out. He placed it on the kitchen table, right beside their wedding photo. Looking around the house one last time, Tony didn't feel anger, only emptiness. Because this wasn't revenge, it was self-rescue. When someone tramples on your trust, walking away in silence is the only way to keep your dignity intact. And sometimes, leaving doesn't mean losing. It means beginning to live again. That afternoon, when her car pulled into the driveway, the sun was still resting low over the rooftops. She walked in, suitcase in hand, calling softly, "Tony? Where are you? Where are the kids?" No answer. The house was unusually still. She stepped further in and sensed something was wrong. The family photos were still there, but the closet was empty, the desk drawers bare, and on the kitchen table lay a folded note. She picked it up, opened it slowly, and read, I know about Tahoe. I know about him. I've moved out. Everything inside her collapsed at once. She called him, again and again. The phone rang, buzzed, went silent, then rang again. Finally, Tony answered. Her voice trembled, panicked. Tony, what's going on? Where are you? You're misunderstanding something. Tony exhaled softly. His tone was calm, almost detached, as if they were talking about the weather. I'm not misunderstanding anything. I know everything. Tahoe, him. All the lies. She started crying, words tumbling out between gasps. Yes, I went to Tahoe, but it wasn't what you think. I just met an old friend. We talked, that's all. You're overreacting. Tony said nothing. He had heard enough excuses in his life to know when someone was lying. After a pause, he asked, quietly, but with the weight of steel, Do you still love him? On the other end, no more crying, just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. She wanted to say no, but the word wouldn't come. She wanted to explain, but nothing she could say would matter now. Silence. Sometimes that's the most honest truth there is. Tony let out a slow breath. I understand, he said. You don't need to say anything else. And when he hung up, he didn't feel angry anymore. He didn't even feel pain, only clarity. Because in that moment, in her silence, he had heard everything he needed to hear. Not through her words, but through the space between two people who once called each other husband and wife. A silence wide enough to bury a marriage. After that final conversation, Tony never looked back. He quietly filed for divorce, bringing with him every piece of evidence he'd gathered. The bank statements, call logs, photos, and screenshots. Everything was neatly organized in a single folder, as if he were closing out a project rather than ending a 16-year marriage. The court hearing was quiet. No tears. No apologies that could have changed anything. His lawyer spoke in a calm, steady tone. Factual, detached, like reading a report. They say divorces in California are quick and fair, but fairness in the eyes of the law isn't the same as fairness to the heart. Tony won the case, if you could call it that. The evidence of her affair was undeniable. She couldn't refute a thing. The assets were divided, though the court took into account the money she had spent on the affair. The children would live alternately, 1 week with their father, 1 week with their mother. Tony bought a small apartment near the kids' school, so their lives wouldn't change too much. He tried to keep things normal, cooking dinner, driving them to school, smiling as they told stories about their day. A few months later, he heard she'd moved to Reno to live with the other man. The news came like a soft breeze, neither painful nor surprising. Maybe because a part of him had died long before, the part that still believed love could last forever. But strangely, when everything was over, Tony felt lighter. No anger, no jealousy, just a quiet sense of peace. He started focusing on himself again, taking the kids camping, fixing up the old car in the garage, learning to cook the dishes his wife used to love. Not to win her back, but to relearn how to live for himself. Some wounds don't need to be healed. they just need to be accepted. And Tony had done exactly that. He hadn't lost everything. He had only lost someone who once pretended to love him. I've always believed that stories like Tony's aren't just tragedies, they are mirrors reflecting the raw truth of human nature in love. To love, to betray, and finally, to rise again. When Tony told me his story, what moved me most wasn't the pain he endured, but how he chose to face it. No rage, no revenge, just a quiet man choosing silence to protect the last piece of dignity he had left. The first lesson: intuition. In marriage, there's a feeling we often try to ignore, that faint sense that something isn't right. We dismiss it, call it paranoia, fatigue, imagination. But intuition never lies. It's the voice of experience, of love, of all the subtle shifts we sense before they become real. Tony felt something, and when he chose to listen instead of deny it, he found the truth. The second lesson: love cannot survive in a house where trust has died. Trust is the invisible pillar that holds a relationship together. Once it collapses, you can patch the walls, but you can't rebuild the foundation. Tony could have forgiven her, but he knew that even if she came back, he would never sleep soundly again when she said, "I have a business trip." A relationship without trust isn't love. It's just two people performing the same play, long after the curtain should have fallen. Lesson 3. Dignity matters more than love. When you're betrayed, your first instinct is to fight back, to make them feel the same pain they caused you. But Tony didn't. He walked away. Not because he was weak, but because he understood something deeper. Maturity isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to drown in the mud someone else created. And that calm, quiet strength, that's the hardest blow of all. Lesson 4. Betrayal is never an accident. No one accidentally drives 3 hours to meet an ex. No one accidentally books a hotel for 10 days. Cheating isn't a mistake. It's a series of choices. The choice to lie, the choice to hide, the choice to cross a line again and again. And when you choose something enough times, it stops being a mistake. It becomes who you are. Final lesson: silence is sometimes the loudest answer. Tony didn't need to scream to prove he was hurt. He let her face her own actions. No arguments, no justifications, no saving face. And in that silence, she was forced to hear the sound of her own conscience collapsing. Tony's story isn't just about betrayal, it's about the power of self-respect. When someone betrays you, they lose far more than you realize. They lose your trust. They lose the version of themselves that once existed in your eyes. But when you walk away quietly, with grace and without hate, you regain something they can never touch: peace. Because in the end, betrayal might destroy a marriage, but only dignified silence can lead to rebirth. When I tell Tony's story, I don't want you to focus only on the pain. I want you to see the strength. The strength of a man who didn't scream, didn't seek revenge, didn't beg someone who had already walked away. He simply chose to leave, quietly, with his dignity intact and his heart still whole. We can't control whether someone betrays us, but we can control how we respond, how we rise, and how we walk away without losing the best parts of ourselves. Tony didn't lose a wife. He freed himself from someone who had stopped loving him long ago, someone who no longer deserved the trust he once gave. And if you're going through something similar, remember this: leaving isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing you can do. Because sometimes, forgiveness isn't about holding on. It's about freeing yourself from a lie that went on for too long. I'm Veronica Hale, and this is Love and Lies TV, where we talk about love, heartbreak, and the journey of finding yourself again after it all falls apart. If Tony's story made you think, leave a comment below, share your thoughts, hit like to support the channel, and subscribe to Love and Lies TV for more real stories. Stories that remind us that no matter how deep the hurt, we can all learn to love again, starting with loving ourselves.